We are now going to be having 12 shiurim on 12 perakim. These are the 12 perakim of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and I think it's very important before Pesach to get to know these 12 perakim. Now, there's stories and there's medrash and there's teachings from the Gemara that has been gotten around. To know the full story from beginning to end, what the Torah says, what we can learn from the actual psukim, and what actually happened as the Torah says it, I think is very, very important, and that's the purpose of this share. So let's dig in. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is Share Bays, Parak Bays. Parak Aleph finished off with a segment break, with a little break, and this is Parak Bays. Whenever the Torah does make a little break, it means something new is being introduced over here. Vayelech ish mi Beis Levi, and a man from Beis Levi went out, and he vayikach es bas Levi, and he took a daughter of Levi, either a daughter of Levi literally, or he took someone from the tribe of Levi. We're going to find out who these people are later, and their names and chronology are given later in Parak Vav. But right now, the Torah wants to quickly get to Moshe Rabbeinu talking to Hashem on Har Sinai and by the snap of the burning bush. So it doesn't give the names over here. Ish, although he was a person of significance. When the Torah says Ish, it means a person of significance. Vatar Isha, and the Isha got pregnant. Vatelet Bain, and she gave birth to a son. Pari already said all sons have to be cast into the Nile. Vatera Isai Shalom Kitaivu, he was good. Now Kitaiv is written elsewhere in the Torah by creation, and the further context is given in other places. Like for instance, when Chava saw the Isdas, she said, Kitaiv Lamachel, it's good to eat. Kitaiv Lamachel, it's good to eat. And therefore she saw that it could give her something in the future. Kitaiv also was given by the Sarah Eifim, when he said that Kitaiv Basar, when the translation of the Sarah Mashkin's dream was good. In other words, he didn't see the Sarah Mashkin get saved yet. That happened after. But he saw the interpretation was good. It had good potential for the future. So therefore, he said it was good. When the Bnei Yisrael were arguing with Moshe on the side of the Yamsuf before it was split, they said that it was Kitov to be in Mitzrayim, that it was better to work in Mitzrayim than to be here where they were. Why? Because they could see potential in Mitzrayim. How's that? When they complained about food, Hashem said that because they said Kitov, it was to be Mitzrayim, so it was better to be Mitzrayim, to eat their meat in Mitzrayim, so therefore I'm going to go give them meat. Now, what was their complaint? That was that the mun, which would happen later, obviously, but the mun was a day-to-day thing, and it could not be left over except for Shabbos. And when they were standing before that between an army and a sea, so they saw no future in that. However, working in Mitzrayim, they saw a future, and eating in Mitzrayim, they saw a future because they had their own farms, they had their own animals. So therefore, Kitaiv is always something that's in the future. There's potential in the future. So apparently, this child's mother, obviously Moshe's mother, Yocheved, saw Kitov, that he was good, do something potential that he's going to bring out. He had future potential. Vatzbezehu Shloisha Yerachim, and she hid him for 3 moons. Yerachim is used, not Chodashim. Chodashim is used later, because until Moshe Rabbeinu gave the mitzvah of counting the new moons, Chodashim didn't have any significance to them. Instead, it was Yerachim, 3 moons, 3 months. V'lo yachla oid hatzfinoi, and she could no longer hide him. V'tikach loy v'teva zgoimer, and then she took a teva, and tikach always means that she purchased it. V'yikach v'tikach kach. In the Torah, it means it was purchased. There was a transaction of some sorts. Something gives something else. So apparently, she purchased the materials. Either purchased it for this teva, this little ark. Vatachrim mira, vachemer, vazofes, and then she coated the outside of it. She coated it with pitch and with tar. Vatosem ba es yeled. She placed the yeled into it. Yeled because Pari said that kol haben yelad, every child, every son that is born. In other words, Pari's decree was on all yeladim, all male children, not only infants. So this was a child, a yeled, that was under the auspices of Paro's decree. Vatosem basuf, and she placed it in the reeds, Asfas Hayar, on the edge of the Nile River. Now here's the question: what did she think to gain out of putting a Jewish child, a Ivri child, in an ark on the Nile? Wouldn't anyone who see it know that necessarily it was an Ivri child? The answer is no, because Paro's decree, like we talked about last year, was on every single male child born in the entire Mitzrayim. He didn't want any of Bnei Yisrael's children to be hidden or to be taken shelter or to be found anywhere else. So therefore, Mitzri, Ivri, foreigner alike that was born inside Mitzrayim had to then be thrown into the Nile. So therefore, there probably were many children that were cast on the Nile in trying to get the literal definition of the decree and maybe saving their children. So this is a plan, and this is a plan that might have worked. Now, his sister, the child's sister, who we just learned about now, she stood from afar, Ledeya ma yasalai, to know what was going to happen. Deya means to get the information, to get the knowledge, and it means something either someone knew already and now is focusing on, or it means in events that they're going to get knowledge in the future. So here it was Miriam who was standing from afar, and she was watching as the current took this teva that had her brother in it, and she wanted to know exactly what was going on with the child. Why did she want to know? Why couldn't they just let the child go? She understood that there was some sort of purpose with her younger sibling, and therefore she decided to go, and she wanted to know what became of him. She didn't want just to go into the future. She had to have that knowledge, Odeya. It was something more than just, okay, I'm trying to save my child. Vatered Bas Parai, and now Bas Parai went down Lurchait Aliyar to bathe in the Nile River. She went down. Where did she go down from? Like we talked about last time, she went down from the higher elevations in Upper Egypt, in the south part of Egypt, which is by Thebes. This is the capital cities, and where the Pharaoh sat of the entire Eretz Mitzrayim. So she went down, and if you know that Goshen is the northeast part of Mitzrayim, and that the Nile runs northward into the Mediterranean Sea, how is it possible that Bas Parai would ever come in encounter with this teva? Because it would be put by Goshen and flow north into the Mediterranean Sea and be lost forever. So what she did was she went down and she actually bathed in the north. She wanted to bathe in the high-flowing, high-traffic river of the Nile. That made no sense because there's boats and there's public, and it's just very, very a wide, fast-moving channel. Instead, she went to one of the estuaries in the lower Egypt, which was the north, which was near Goshen, and that's where she was, and that's where she went to bathe, in the calmer waters. V'naraiseha ha'ilchos al yad hayar, and her maidservants went, her attendants went. Nar and Nara in the Torah could mean a young child or a young girl or a young boy, but it also could mean an attendant. For instance, Yosef was called a Nar, Hu Nar. And later on, when Yehuda wanted to save the Nar, why was he a Nar? Because he was an attendant. He attended his father. All his brothers were the shepherds, and he attended his father, so for Yosef was a Nar. And she had attendants. Now, so Bas Parai, of course, would have attendants, obviously, to go with her, and they stayed on the edge of the river. Vatera esateva b'soich hasof. Now, she saw that there was a ark that was somewhere amongst the reeds. So in other words, the ark didn't really travel. If you look at literally the psukim, the ark did not travel anywhere. Because it says, b'soich hasuf. It was still within the reeds. It was put near the reeds. It was still with the reeds. It wasn't cast into the open river and traveling along, and then Bas Parai was able to see it. Instead, she looked at it and saw, and that it was among the reeds still. Vatishlach es amosa, and she sent one of her maid servants out to go take it for her. Again, transaction. The maidservant went and was giving it to her. The maidservant would not take it for herself, was taking it only to give it to Bas Parai. Vatiftach and she opened the ark. Vateru as a yeled, and she saw a child. She knew it's a yeled. A yeled is under the decree of Parai and has to be thrown into the Nile. And she was going to throw the child into the Nile. What happened? Vihine nar boicha. But then the nar cried. Who is a nar? Is it Moshe Rabbeinu? Is it the baby? But the baby is a yeled. The baby is a tinoik. The baby is definitely not a nar. Not in the sense of being a young boy, and not in the sense of being an attendant to anyone. So who's a nar? That it's her attendants. If what she had an attendant, and an attendant cried, and if one of her attendants cried, then Vatachma Olav, and she had pity on him, the attendant, or the child. Either way, Vatoimer, and she said, Miyalde Ivrim Zeh. This is from the Ivrim. So what's going on here? Really, there's two possibilities. Nar either means one of her attendants cried, and she then had mercy on the attendant not to see that she cast a baby into the river. Or the nar could be Aaron, because Aaron became Moshe Rabbeinu's attendant. Aaron was Moshe Rabbeinu's person who went before Pharaoh and spoke and helped him speak. And Aaron is the one who also lifted Moshe's staff and conducted many of the Makos. And Aaron stood by Moshe, and Moshe Rabbeinu appointed Aaron along with Hor to be in charge of an Israel at Har Sinai. So Aaron was a nar. If Aaron was a nar to Moshe, so nar, this is what it's talking about. Aaron was there also. Miriam followed from afar, and Aaron was there, and Aaron started crying. Vatachma love, and she had pity on one of these nars, one of these attendants, one of these young children attendants. But Toimer, she said, who said? Miriam said, Miyalde Ivrim Zeh. This is a Hebrew child. It was not apparent, again, to Bas Parai that this baby was Hebrew. Why? Because all children in the entire mitzrayim had to be cast into the Nile River. So therefore, it was not necessarily right now apparent to Bas Parai this was an Ivri child. Otherwise, the Toimer, who's she talking to? Is she talking to her maidservant? Who's she saying? No. Miriam is telling very quietly to Bas Parai, by the way, this is a Hebrew child. And it comes important because because the sister said El Bas Parai to Bas Parai, continues. Ha'elech, let me go, v'karasi lach, and let me call for you Isha Menekes, a wet nurse, min ha'Ivriyos, from the Hebrews. You don't want an Egyptian to nurse a Hebrew child. Let me call one of the Hebrew wet nurses to wet nurse the child, vatenik lach as a yeled, and she will then feed the child for you. Vataymer la Bas Parai, and Bas Parai said to her, yes, lechi, go ahead. Vatelech ha'alma, and the alma went. At this point, Miriam was an alma. She was a maiden. She was young. Batikra es aim hayeled, and she called the mother of the child. Why doesn't it say she called Imai, her mother? Right? She was a sister. It could be either that it was Miriam that went with one of the Amos, right? It could be a maidservant from Bas Parai that went along with Miriam, and she's the one who called the mother of the child. Or Miriam pointed out, this is a wet nurse, and it happened to be, she called the mother of the child. And obviously, they did not know. It was known to Miriam, but it was not known to them. She couldn't say, I'm calling my mother. She was calling a mother of a child. Therefore, there's a mother of a child. It could be it's unrelated to me. But Taimila Bas Parai, and Bas Parai said to her, Helechi, go as a yeled, hazeh, and this child, v'aniku and nurse it for me, v'ani etein es scharech, and I will give you wages. V'tikach ha'isha, and the woman took a yeled, again she took it in exchange for being the wet nurse, even though she was her mother, and even though she wanted to. But again, this was not necessarily known to Bas Parai. It seemed like it was a transaction to Bas Parai, so that the identity of the child should not be known. Just in case it was discovered who did it, the family should not be punished. And she nursed the child. It's interesting over here. It says, go, Helichi, go, Esayel. It doesn't say, the Esayeled Hazev Neuli. Go with the child. It's basically saying, go, child. In other words, the child should go. You should go, and the child should come with you. In other words, I have to hide the child. Something here has to be secret about the child. This cannot be known to everyone that this is being done. So the question, of course, is how is it possible that she would be able to be a wet nurse to the child? If the child was found with an Ivri woman, the child would then be cast into the Nile. So if she wasn't able to, the mother wasn't able to hide the child until now, how is it the mother able to hide the child all of a sudden now? How is that possible? Because that's the answer. The answer is Elichi, go. And you're going to do is, this child will be here and you will nurse it for me. In other words, really the child stayed close to Bas Parai, probably out of Goshen. And they would take the child and go nurse it and then bring the child back. And this would go on. Vayigdal hal yeled, and the child grew up. Now, Vayigdal hal yeled, Vayigdal is said over here, and it's said again in the next pasuk, and we'll discuss it more in the next pasuk. Vayigdal hal yeled, and the yeled grew up, sort of like when Yitzchak, Vayigdal hayeled gamol, and he was weaned. So Vayigdal hayeled, Vativehu lebas Parai, and he was brought to Bas Parai, and she brought him to Bas Parai. Vayihi la lebain, and then at this point, when she no longer needed to go and take the child away to nurse and bring the child back to Bas Parai, finally he was nursed for the last time and brought to Bas Parai. Vayihi, and it was to her a bain. She adopted this child, and she said, "This is my child. My child is obviously exempt from being thrown into the Nile River. This is my child." But Tikra Shemai Moshe, and she called his name Moshe. Why? But Tomer, because she said, Ki min hamayim shisiu, because from water he was drawn. Now, the Torah is saying, Ki min hamayim shisiu, because that is similar to Moshe. But the Torah is really trying to say something like this. Moshe was named Moshe for whatever reason, for whatever Egyptian reason, and it was something similar like Ki min hamayim shisiu, because he was drawn from water. She didn't speak Hebrew. She didn't speak Ivri. She spoke Egyptian, and she named him an Egyptian name, but she named him something to do with how he was born. So it could be an Egyptian translation of Minamanam Mishisiyu, which is also has similar words and ends up falling out to the name Moshe. The other possibility is that there's no Nakudas in Torah, and his name was Moshe. Moshe. Because Moshe, the word Moshe means house or temple in Egyptian. So it could be his name was Moshe, the royal house, or a religious or very important house or temple in Mitzrayim. So therefore his name was Moshe because of that. And the Torah is saying similar, Moshe, he was drawn from water, so it ended up being something similar. So in other words, another similar type of understanding of why he was named. His name had importance. So how is Minamayim Shisiyu the same thing as an important royal house? Because just like a royal house or something, or the Pharaoh's house is the one that gives water and controls the Nile and gives water to all of Mitzrayim and controls that. So therefore, he also was drawn from this very important place, the Nile River, and therefore he was named something that was royally connected to water. And that's how his name was Moshe. Just like the Torah gives the Hebrew-ized version of all the names of everyone that was around. Like we have Nebuchadnezzar or Nebuchadnezzar. There's anglicized versions and there's Hebrew version, and there's obviously the original version that came from the original language. The Torah gives the Hebrew-ized version. And it was in those days that Bnei Yisrael did not know Yosef. In those days that Bnei Yisrael worked and were taxed and grew many, 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 and that Moshe was then taken into the house of Bas Paro. It was in those days, Vayigdal Moshe grew up. So what does it mean, Vayigdal Moshe? Moshe grew up. So Vayigdal Yeled, like we talked about before, that Yitzchak grew up and he was weaned, but it also means when he gets an adult, Vayhi Elokim es hanar v'yigdal. Hashem was with Yishmael and he grew and he became great. In other words, Yishmael grew up and became great. And also, it says that Hashem Berach es Adoni, Hashem blessed my master Avram Ma'od Vayigdal, and he became great. He became rich and he became great. So that's a different interpretation of the word Vayigdal. So Moshe Rabbeinu not only aged, but he also became great. He must have become some sort of advisor or general or some sort of courtesan or something in Paro's palace. Moshe became a great man in Mitzrayim. He was known as a great man in Mitzrayim that everyone feared, everyone respected, everyone knew. He became wealthy. Vayetze alachiv, but then he went out to his brothers. Now, it could be that he knew that he was Ivri from when he was a child, because until he was basically weaned, 3 years old, that's per se, those days, he would have been constantly with his mother and his sister and his brother and his father, and therefore he would have had familiar memories of him being that he was a Hebrew. It could also be that since his mother knew that he was Hebrew, somehow his mother told him, or the information let slip. Vayarbis loisam, and he saw his brothers, and he calls them his brothers. He doesn't call the Hebrews, because Elachiv, his brothers, meaning Moshe knew that they were his brothers. Not that he went out to go see the Hebrews as an Egyptian. Hi, I'm an Egyptian prince, and I'm going to see the Hebrews. No, he went out as his brothers. He knew that he was an Hebrew himself, living in Bas Paro's palace, a household. Vayar bisavloisam, and he saw their burdens. Vayar ish mitzri. Now again, everything is truncated, so one pasuk gives a lot of information. So all this is happening, and while this is happening, while he's looking out at the burdens of his brothers, of his fellow Hebrews, Vayar, he sees ish mitzri, a mitzri taskmaster, right? Someone important. Make ish ivri me'achav. He's striking at a Ivri person. There were obviously there were people among the Hebrews that were made important. In other words, that they were overseers of the Ivrim, or he was an elder of the Ivrim. He could have been a Zaken, or it could have been one of the tribal leaders. He was an Ish Ivri Me'achiv. Again, Me'achiv, from his brothers. Very likely, Me'achiv means it was Shevet Levi. If it was Me'achiv, his brothers, it very likely could have been Shevet Levi. And this Ish Mitzri was now striking at this Jewish elder, or elderman, or noble, not noble, but some sort of important person. Vayifen, and he turned, Choy v'choy. Moshe Rabbeinu turned this way and that way. Vayar ki ein ish. And he saw that there's no person. There's no man. Not that there's no people there, because then it would have been like, there's no one there. It says in ein ish, that there was no other person of importance who's going to take care of this. Moshe Rabbeinu turned around and said, 1 second, someone has to deal with this. It's not right for a Mitzri to go ahead and strike an overseer, an elder of the Ivrim. But there was ein ish. There was no one to be found. He looked, but no one wanted to step up to the plate and deal with this. So, Vayach es a Mitzri. So Moshe is the one who struck the Mitzri. He punished him, he killed him, he did something with the Mitzri. Or he accused him. It doesn't necessarily say that he killed him. It means he gave a plague, Vayach, the same way the plagues are called Makkah. He says Vayach, a strike. It was a strike of the Mitzri. He did something to the Mitzri, either demoted him, or he actually hit him physically, or he gave him to authorities, or he told someone else to take care of him. He did something to this Mitzri. And he buried him in the sand. So obviously this Mitzri, it sounds like the Mitzri died, and he buried it in the sand. It could also be that he buried the whole mice in the sand. In other words, he put this to bed. He took care of this Mitzri. He stepped in and decided to take justice for himself, because no one else was taking justice, and he buried the matter in the sand. In other words, he buried it not in the ground, and the ground gives him more of a permanence, but like in the sand, quickly covered up the matter. He went on a second time, a second day, a second kufa, The next day, it doesn't say the next day. The second day, he went out another tkufa a different time. And now again, this is, although it's all connected in one parsha, everything is truncated, so we don't know how much time passed. Vehine shnei anashim ivrim nitzim, and there were two ivrim, and they were anashim, they were important people. Nitzim. What is nitzim? Nitzim means to draw something out, to plunder. You see it when Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron said, we're going to take water out of the rock, right? They're going to draw it out. They were going to plunder it or remove something from something else. So what were these people doing? Is the name of a kite or a falcon, because they steal the eggs, or they steal the younglings of other birds. So these Ivrim apparently were plundering others. They were stealing, or they were taking by force, or they were making themselves more important than other Ivrim. Vayomer l'Rasha, so Moshe Rabbeinu said to the evil one, the one that was the head of this scheme, Lama takarecha, why are you striking at your recha, from your friends, your neighbors? You're doing something wrong to your neighbors. Vayomer, so this Rasha said, Mi samcha le'ish, who made you in Ish a noble or a supervisor, sar, a chief, the shoifet, and a judge, aleinu on us? Who made you these things on us? Harlegreini ata omer, are you going to say that I also should be killed? Just like you said that the mitzri should be killed, so too are you saying that I should be killed? So apparently Moshe Rabbeinu had ordered that the mitzri be killed. And now he's going to say that I also should be killed because I'm stealing from my brothers? Who are you? You are Moshe. We know that you are from the Egyptian palace, and we also know that you're an Ivri. So who are you to be on us? If they thought Moshe Rabbeinu was a Mitzri, then they would never dare speak to Moshe Rabbeinu that way. How could they possibly talk to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, "Hi, Egyptian chieftain, how dare you talk to me?" Because the Ivrim were subjugated by the Egyptians. Clearly, by the way he was talking to Moshe Rabbeinu and saying that you also should say that I should be killed, the only way he could say that is if he knew Moshe Rabbeinu's secret, and that was that he was an Ivri. Kasher haragta es mitzri, just like you killed the mitzri, you're going to say that I should die, just like you gave an order that the mitzri should also die? Therefore, it seems to me that you are both. You are both an Egyptian and you are a Hebrew. Because I could talk to you this way, because you're just a Hebrew, but I know that you have power because you're really a mitzri. You grew up in Paro's palace. Vayira Moshe Vayomer, and Moshe then now feared Vayomer, and he told his mother Bas Paroi or anyone else that obviously Vayomer, and he said, Achein noida hadavar. This matter, the truth of the matter is known. Not the matter of the Mitzri. Moshe Rabbeinu was a prince of Egypt. Of course, there was no problem that he had some lowly Egyptian taskmaster killed. If he felt the Egyptian taskmaster had to be killed, the Egyptian taskmaster had to be killed. What? Life was not suddenly cheap in the ancient world? They all of a sudden in mitzrayim, all of a sudden life is something worthwhile, and they don't just kill people willy-nilly. The whole entire ancient world, all of a sudden life means something? No, of course not. If an Egyptian prince says you're going to kill this mitzri, even if he was a mitzri of importance, okay, bada bing, bada boom, he's put to death. So what was Moshe Rabbeinu worried? The truth is I'm an Ivri. And that is what they found out. And now I have a problem. Because since I caught them, they are going to get this to the higher-ups and going to be exposed. Vayishma Paroi Zabrazeh. And indeed, they moisered on him. Paroi heard about this. They moisered on Moshe Rabbeinu, and they said he is actually an Ivri. How he survived? He was taken somehow by your sister or your cousin or your daughter. It could be the same Paroi, then by your daughter. And now this son that you think is your grandson or your is a really adopted grandson. It's really an Ivri and still falls under your decree. So Paroi's the one who heard about this. Parai, who made the decree that all children in Mitzrayim should die, he's the one who heard about this. Moshe Rabbeinu heard that Parai heard. Vayevakesh laharagis Moshe, and he wanted to kill Moshe. Now Parai wanted to kill Moshe because Moshe was this Hebrew child that escaped him all this time. Vayivrach Moshe mipnei Parai. Moshe then escaped from Parai. The pasuk doesn't end. The pasuk has more information, but really that's where that clause really ends. And the pasuk adds on, Vayeshev be'eretz Midyan. He settled in the land of Midyan. Vayeshev al be'er, and he settled near the well. Now we don't know how long this was, because Moshe Rabbeinu grew up and he came back to Mitzrayim when he was 80 years old, like we're going to learn. So if he was 80 years old when he came back to talk to Parai Mitzrayim and set the Bnei Yisrael free, so then a long time. This is a very long time that he was in Midian. We don't know how long. We don't know. He could have been all over the place. First of all, he ran from Mitzrayim. He could have gone to Canaan. He could have gone to where the Pelishtim were. He could have gone all up to where Haran was, to Aramea. He could have gone south to Cush. We don't know where he went. He fled. He settled in Midian, and he lived in Midian for a while. Obviously, he established himself in Midian. He established himself by the well. Ulakayin Midyan, and now we're going to see such thing. The Kayin Midyan, remember how we talked about how the Torah talks about things when the Bnei Yisrael got the Torah and not necessarily what happened. So Lakayin Midyan, that Yisrael eventually became the Kayin Midyan, and through this episode is going to be called the Kayin Midyan Chayzen Moshe. He became the Kayin Midyan. At this point, he was not yet the Kayin Midyan, but we're referring to him as the Kayin Midyan because he was the Kayin Midyan. So for Bnei Yisrael to understand who he was, we're calling him the Kayin Midyan. Notice how his name is not Yisro here, but he was Kayin Midyan, right? Kayin Midyan Sheva Banos. So, or the other alternative was, he was the Kayin Midyan now, and his name was not Yisro. Later on, he was no longer the Kayin Midyan, and his name was Yisro. And Yisro, Chayzen Moshe, Kayin Midyan, all being one, the same person. Anyway, either way, either he will be the Kayin Midyan, or at the time he was a Kayin Midyan. He had 7 daughters, Shavabanos, Vatavaina, and they went Vatilana, and they went to draw Vatamilana Asaritim to fill up their troughs. Valahashkai Sain Avihem, to water and to give the drink the cattle, the flock of their father. Vayava Harayim Vayigarshum. And the shepherds, local shepherds came, or foreign shepherds came, shepherds came, and drove them off, and didn't allow them to draw the water. So Vayaka Moshe again, the civil rights leader, the one who stood up for the Ivrim, even though no one else was standing up for the Ivri, for the Ivri man. Moshe Rabbeinu stood up there and had the mitzvah killed because of it. Vayaka Moshe got up, and he saved them. Vayash Esatzoinim, and he gave to drink to their flock, to the sheep. But Tavaina El Ruel Avihan, and they came to Ruel again. His name is not Yisrael over here. Over here, his name is Ruel Avihan, to the father. So it could be his name was eventually Ruel when the time was giving the Torah and before it was Yisrael, or his name was Ruel now and Yisrael at the time when they got the Torah and changed his name later on. Either way. So it could be Ruel, but he kept saying that Yisrael Kayin Midyan. So it could be that Yisrael, who was the Kayin Midyan, Yisrael no longer the Kayin Midyan, Yisrael was the Kayin Midyan, who's Ruel the Kayin was the Kayin Midyan, and Yisrael is not the Kayin Midyan, or vice versa. This is how you have to read the Torah. This is how you get clues of what the Pesukim are talking about. But to rule Avian, to rule the father said, he said, Ma dua mehartem boy hayom. How did you get here so fast? Tamarna, the Ish Mitzri. They told him that there was an Ish Mitzri, a very important Mitzri man. The Ish Mitzri. They didn't say Ha Ish Mitzri. It was Ish Mitzri. They probably had many Egyptian people that came through, but in Ish Mitzri, one of these people who was living there that was from Mitzrayim, obviously by clothes or by something or by language, he identified himself as Mitzri, so they knew that he was Mitzri. Hitzilanu miyad harayim. He saved us from the hand of the shepherds. The gam dalai lanu, and he also drew the water for us. V'yashket sign, and he watered our flock. V'yomer el b'naisav v'ayim, and he says, well, where is he? If this man saved you, where is he? In our house, we have gratitude. Lamazeh azav ten es ish. You abandoned him. You cannot abandon someone who you have to give gratitude for. Reuel was giving his children the lesson that you have to have Hakar's Toiv. And this is the exact household that Moshe Rabbeinu then was adopted in a second time. Keren loy vayecha lachem. Go ahead and call and let him eat bread. Vayel Moshe, so Moshe agreed. Losheves ish, to reside with the man. He settled with the man. He stayed with him in his household. Vayitin as Sapira, and he gave Sapira Bita, his daughter, LeMoshe. So he gave Sapira his daughter to Moshe for a wife. Vateled Bain, and she gave birth to a son. Vayikra Shemai Gershom, he called him Gershom. Ki Amar, he said, Ger Hayisi V'Eretz Nachriya. I am a sojourner, I am a foreign person who's living in an eretz that is foreign to me. So he named this child Gershom. We're going to see later that he does not name his other child, and the name of the other child is not named until much later, and we'll talk about that when that time comes. Now, there's a break. The Torah has a small little break. This episode from Moshe Rabbeinu's parents marrying and him being born until now is a little segment. The parak ends with one smaller segment. Many, many days were there. And this is going back on the beginning of this episode where Moshe Rabbeinu grew up and then had to leave. Not necessarily after his child was born, but somewhere along this episode where Moshe Rabbeinu was settling in Midian, there was many, many days. Vayamas Melech Mitzrayim, and the Melech of Mitzrayim died. This is the local nomarch. He died. Not Pharaoh. Pharaoh was still sitting there. We don't know what happened to Pharaoh, but right now we know the local person it was a city-state king who was in charge of the district of Mitzrayim, which was where Goshen was. He died. So it gave the Bnei Yisrael hope. There's going to be a new regime change. Maybe we're no longer going to have to be stuck in the civil service, or maybe we're not going to be treated as poorly. Vayanchu Bnei Yisrael min avoda, and they groaned because of their burdens. Vayizaku, and they cried out. Vatal, and the cries went up. Shavasam El Elokim min avoda, and their cries went up to be heard by Hashem because of their hard work. Vayishma Elokim es nakmasam, and Hashem heard all their groaning. Vayizkar Elokim es brisai, and Hashem remembered his bris, when he was Kel Shakai, and he promised to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, as Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that he's going to give this land to their children. Vayar Elikim as Bnei Yisrael. So Hashem went to go look at Bnei Yisrael. Vayeda Elikim, and Hashem knew. Now it's time. Now it's time to take Bnei Yisrael out of the burdens and to give them Eretz Canaan